My phone buzzed that morning, and I will never forget the way her voice sounded. It was flat, almost cold, as though I was just another stranger she had to get rid of. Tomorrow we're leaving. Your beach house and your car are already sold. Bye, Mom. I stood there, phone pressed against my ear, listening to my only daughter dismiss me like a problem that had already been solved. In that moment, everything inside me froze. Years of sacrifice, years of working double shifts, years of putting her before myself. All of it shattered in the space of a single sentence. Most mothers would have broken down right then. Most would have begged for answers, for compassion, for a scrap of love from the child they once held in their arms. But not me. My lips curled into a smile she couldn't see, because my daughter had made a mistake so devastating she didn't even realize it yet. And as she waited for me to crumble, I whispered into the phone. You forgot something. There was silence on her end. A silence heavy with confusion, the kind that makes you check if the line is still connected. Then her voice sharpened, uneasy. What are you talking about? I laughed. Not out of joy, but out of the kind of bitter amusement that comes when betrayal meets its own undoing. Because the house she had so confidently sold, the house she had paraded around as hers to give away, was never hers to begin with. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. To understand why this moment mattered, you need to know what came before. The quiet sacrifices, the blind trust, and the storm of greed that had been building in my own family for years. This is not just a story about property or money. This is a story about betrayal at its cruelest, heartbreak at its deepest, and a revenge so silent it left no scars, only echoes. And before we step fully into this journey, I have one request. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I really want to know how far this story has reached. Don't just watch in silence. Your support means the world. I had always thought that after losing my husband, life would at least slow down. I imagined mornings where I'd sip my coffee on the porch of my beach house, watching the tide roll in, feeling the salty air brush against my skin. That house wasn't just a piece of property, it was the place where my husband and I had poured our love, our sweat, and our dreams. Every wall echoed with memories of birthdays, Christmas mornings, late-night talks, and promises whispered in the dark. It was the heart of everything we had built together. After his passing, it became my sanctuary. I'd walk through those rooms and hear his voice in the creak of the floorboards, see his smile in the photographs that lined the shelves. The house grounded me, reminding me that although he was gone, his presence still wrapped around me. The car too, it wasn't just transportation. It was a symbol of independence, of being able to carry on even when grief pressed down hard. But where I found peace, my daughter saw something else entirely. Anna had always been headstrong. From the time she was little, she wanted everything bigger, shinier, faster. If her friends had a bicycle, she wanted the one with streamers and a horn. If her classmates wore sneakers, she begged me for the ones with flashing lights in the soles. I thought it was just a child's nature, something she would outgrow. But she never did. That hunger for more only grew with her. By the time she married David, that hunger had turned into entitlement. David fed it. He was charming in public, the kind of man who could make neighbors smile with a handshake and a compliment. But behind closed doors, I could see the calculations in his eyes. He measured people not by their character, but by their usefulness. And to him, I wasn't his wife's mother. I was a bank account in human form. Anna would come to the house often, but her visits were rarely about seeing me. She'd walk through the rooms like an inspector, her eyes scanning the furniture, the paintings, the silverware. Sometimes she'd run her fingers across the mantel and say, "Mom, you really don't need all this anymore. It's too much for you." Other times she'd sigh as if burdened by my existence and mutter, "If Dad had left things to me, I'd know exactly what to do with them." I would bite my tongue, holding back the words that wanted to leap out. I wanted to remind her of the nights I stayed awake sewing her clothes because I couldn't afford store-bought ones. I wanted to tell her about the second job I worked to put her through college, while her father and I pinched pennies just to keep the lights on. But I didn't. I kept quiet, because a mother's silence often feels easier than confrontation. David wasn't any better. He'd lounge on the patio, beer in hand, staring out at the water as though it already belonged to him. One evening he joked, "This place would make a great rental. We could make a fortune." He didn't even flinch when he said it. He didn't look at me to gauge my reaction. He said it as though I was already gone, as though I was nothing more than an obstacle in the way of his plans. It was then that I began to notice the distance growing between us. Conversations that once flowed were now short and transactional. Calls from Anna were less about love and more about money, favors, or what she thought I should be doing with my life. Her laughter, the kind that once filled the house when she was a child, had turned sharp, hollow. I would lie awake some nights staring at the ceiling, asking myself where I had gone wrong. Was I too giving? Too forgiving? Had I loved her so much that I blinded myself to the person she was becoming? Each question weighed heavy, but answers never came. What I did feel, however, was the slow creeping sense that something was shifting in ways I couldn't quite see. And yet I stayed quiet. I smiled through family dinners where Anna complained about how unfair life was. I listened as she compared her struggles to mine, never acknowledging the decades I had spent making sure she had opportunities one never dreamed of. I endured David's smug remarks, his subtle hints about how much easier things would be if I just simplified my life. I wasn't naive. I could feel the tension tightening like a rope slowly pulling taut. I could see the looks they exchanged when they thought I wasn't watching. I could hear the faint impatience in their voices whenever they spoke about the future. A future they clearly imagined without me in it. But I said nothing. I carried their words like stones in my chest, heavy but hidden. I walked through my home, touching the furniture, the walls, the photographs, as though reminding myself, this is mine. These are my memories. My life. And no matter how much envy flickered in my daughter's eyes, she couldn't take away what those walls had given me. Still deep inside I knew something was coming. And though I couldn't name it, I could feel it pressing at the edges of my life. A mother always knows even when she pretends not to. My silence wasn't weakness. It was preparation. I remember the exact hour it happened. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. The kind of mixture that clings to your clothes even after you've stepped outside. I had been sitting there, clutching my handbag, waiting for my name to be called for a routine checkup. My mind wasn't on the doctor or the results. It was drifting, as it often did, to memories of my husband and the life we had built. I thought about the last time we had walked into a hospital together, his hand gripping mine as though letting go would mean losing everything. Those memories came in waves, steady, painful, unrelenting. Then my phone rang. Anna's name lit up the screen. For a moment, I felt a pang of relief. Perhaps she was finally calling to ask how I was doing. Or maybe she wanted to hear my voice without an agenda attached. I pressed the phone to my ear, holding my breath, clinging to hope. But her words were like knives. Tomorrow we're leaving. Your beach house and your car are already sold. Bye, Mom. There was no tenderness, no hesitation. She said it as though she were announcing a delivery or reading from a receipt. My grip on the phone tightened, my knuckles whitening. I could hear the faint buzz of fluorescent lights above me, the soft shuffle of a nurse walking past. But in that moment, the world collapsed into silence. My heart thundered against my ribs, each beat heavier than the last, as though it was trying to escape. My palms grew damp, and my fingers trembled around the phone. My throat tightened, but no tears came. Betrayal doesn't always bring tears at first. Sometimes it brings a numbness so sharp it feels like your skin might split open. My daughter, my only child, had stripped away years of trust in a handful of words. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her how she could do this, how she could look at everything her father and I had sacrificed and treat it like scraps at a yard sale. But instead, a strange calm washed over me. It wasn't peace. It was something colder, something steadier. A part of me understood in that instant that she had already crossed a line she could never step back from. I drew in a breath, steadying the tremor in my chest. And with a voice that surprised even me, I said softly, I understand, but you forgot something. For the first time, there was hesitation on her end. Silence stretched across the line like a taut wire. I could almost picture her standing there, phone pressed against her ear, brows furrowed, lips tightening. Then she asked, sharp and defensive, what are you talking about? I could hear the edge in her voice, the slight quiver of uncertainty. She thought she had planned everything, thought she had stripped me of power, thought she was announcing a victory. But my words unsettled her, knocked her off the script she had rehearsed in her mind. I let out a laugh. Not a laugh of joy, not even of anger, but the kind of laugh that comes when betrayal is so deep, so absolute, that it almost seems absurd. Because the truth was simple. She had celebrated too soon. I didn't explain. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I wanted her to stew in it, to feel the weight of not knowing. I wanted her to wonder, to question what she had missed, to realize that the power she thought she held was slipping through her fingers. The nurse at the desk called my name, her voice cutting through the fog, but I didn't move. My chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven breaths. My body was in that doctor's office, but my mind was already elsewhere, replaying Anna's words, dissecting every syllable. I thought back to the look in her eyes during her last visit, the way she had run her fingers along the railing of the staircase, lingering as though she was already measuring the space for someone else. I remembered the way David had smirked when he talked about how much money could be made if the property was put on the market. It was all clear now. They hadn't been visiting me. They had been casing the place, laying the groundwork for this very moment. But what Anna didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that her father and I had built safeguards, quiet ones that no greedy hand could dismantle. The house she thought she had sold, the car she believed she had claimed, were protected in ways she had never imagined. As I sat there in that sterile waiting room, the phone still warm in my hand, I felt something shift inside me. I was no longer the mother desperate for her child's affection. I was the woman my husband had always told me I was, strong, steady, and capable of holding her ground even when the people closest to her tried to knock her down. Anna's voice cut back in, sharp and uneasy. "Mom, what do you mean? What did I forget?" I said nothing. I ended the call. Because sometimes silence speaks louder than any explanation. And as I walked toward the nurse who was waiting to usher me in, my hand still trembling, my heart still pounding, I knew this was only the beginning. My daughter thought she had won. But she had no idea that the game she was playing was one she could never truly control. Betrayal doesn't happen in a single moment. It builds slowly, quietly, like a shadow stretching across a wall, until you suddenly realize you're standing in the dark. That phone call didn't come out of nowhere. No, the seeds had been planted long before, hidden in small gestures, disguised as help, cloaked in the voice of a daughter I thought I could still trust. I began to notice it the year Anna and David started complaining about their finances more openly. At first, it was subtle, little sighs when the credit card bill came, offhand comments about rent being too high, the cost of groceries eating into their budget. They had good jobs, or at least decent ones, but they lived as though every dollar burned a hole in their pockets. Vacations, new clothes, nights out at restaurants where the wine list was longer than the menu. They wanted the lifestyle, not the work that came with sustaining it. Anna would stop by the house, her visits timed suspiciously around the first of the month. She'd sit at the kitchen table, stirring a cup of coffee she never finished, and steer the conversation toward money. "Mom, you don't need 2 bedrooms upstairs anymore. You barely use half this place. Why not downsize? Or, the upkeep on a house like this must be exhausting for you. You deserve less stress." I would nod politely, though inside I felt the prickle of unease. My daughter wasn't offering concern. She was planting doubts, testing the waters, gauging how much she could convince me to let go. And David, always lurking nearby, would reinforce her words. He'd lean back in his chair, eyes drifting over the cabinets, the appliances, the view out the window, and say, "She's right, you know. You could sell this place and live more comfortably somewhere smaller. Maybe a condo. Let someone else deal with maintenance." But comfort was never the point. This house wasn't a burden. It was my history, my stability, my anchor. And their eagerness to see it gone told me everything I needed to know. Then came the papers. One afternoon, Anna arrived with a folder tucked under her arm. She said it was nothing major, just some forms that needed my signature for insurance updates. I remember the way she smiled, too wide, too practiced. She laid the papers on the table, flipping through them quickly, speaking fast enough that I could barely catch the details. "It's just routine, Mom. I've been helping with some of the paperwork since Dad passed. You know how complicated these things can be." I picked up the pen, but something in me hesitated. Maybe it was the way her eyes darted to David, or the way her hand lingered too close to the signature line, as though guiding me toward a trap. I set the pen down and said, "I'll look these over later." She forced a laugh, brushing it off, but I could see the flicker of frustration behind her eyes. That night, I stayed up late reading every line. Most of it was what she claimed. Insurance, utilities, minor updates. But one document stood out. It wasn't insurance at all. It was a form related to property management, something that could, if signed, grant her access to decisions about the house. She had slipped it in, quiet as a thief. I didn't confront her. I wanted to, how I wanted to demand an explanation. But instead, I filed the papers away without a single signature and waited. Sometimes silence reveals more than shouting ever could. And my silence forced her to try again. Over the months that followed, she became bolder. She offered to help organize my files, to make things easier for me. She'd sit at my desk, rifling through drawers, claiming she was tidying when in truth her eyes were scanning, searching for leverage. I would watch from the hallway, pretending to be busy, and every time my stomach twisted tighter. David played his part too. He'd casually ask questions that seemed harmless on the surface, but carried a heavier weight. "Who's on the deed, Mom? Just you, or is Anna listed too? You know, for safety. Or, do you keep a copy of the car title here or at the bank?" His tone was always light, but his eyes betrayed him. Those weren't questions of curiosity. They were questions of strategy. I started noticing inconsistencies in their stories, little cracks in the facade. Anna once told me she was struggling to pay the mortgage, but days later she bragged about a weekend trip they were planning to Miami. David claimed he was saving for their future, but he drove up one afternoon in a car that was far beyond their means. They were drowning in debt, but instead of learning to swim, they were building rafts out of other people's sacrifices. And all the while I kept my mouth shut, observing, filing away each slip, each calculated move. A mother knows when something isn't right. And though I wanted desperately to believe that my daughter was incapable of such deception, the evidence piled up until denial was no longer an option. The final piece came when I found a copy of my own signature on a document I had never signed. It was tucked into a folder left carelessly in my desk after one of Anna's so-called organizing sessions. At first glance it looked like my handwriting. The curves, the loops, almost perfect. But not quite. There was a stiffness to it. A hesitation in the pen strokes that told me it wasn't mine. My own daughter had tried to mimic me, to forge her way into ownership of something she hadn't earned. I held the paper in my hands for a long time that night, my heart heavy, my stomach churning. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It wasn't just about the car. It was about trust, about love twisted into greed, about a bond that should have been unbreakable but was now fraying at the seams. I placed the document back where I had found it. I wanted her to believe her plan was working. I wanted her to think I was blind, unaware, unsuspecting. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon is not stopping someone, but letting them walk straight into their own undoing. So I waited. I smiled at her when she visited. I let David lounge on my patio and dream about profits. I listened to their complaints, their fabricated struggles, their rehearsed sympathy. All the while, I held my silence like a blade tucked close to the chest, sharp and ready. They thought they were clever, thought they were playing a game I didn't even know existed. But I knew. I knew every move, every whisper, every false smile. And as each day passed, I grew more certain that the storm was coming. The betrayal was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable, and when it arrived, I would be ready. I learned long ago that silence is not weakness. Silence is patience, it's strategy, it's the shield you hold while the enemy charges blindly forward. My daughter thought she was weaving a flawless web around me, but what she never knew was that I had already begun laying down my own defenses. Quietly, carefully, without a word. It began after my husband passed. Grief has a way of sharpening the world, of stripping away illusions and forcing you to see things as they are. On one of those long, sleepless nights, I remembered something he used to say whenever he locked the doors at night or checked the bank statements twice. He would smile and say, "Always protect what matters. Because love is precious, but so is what you've built with your hands." Those words stayed with me. And as much as I wanted to trust blindly, something in me refused to ignore the unease. So one afternoon, I walked into a lawyer's office alone. I didn't tell Anna, I didn't mention it to David, not even to my closest friend. The less people knew, the stronger my position. I sat across from the lawyer, a gray-haired man with kind but shrewd eyes, and I told him everything. I told him about my house, about the beach property, about the car, and about my growing suspicion that not everyone in my family had my best interests at heart. He didn't look surprised. He leaned forward, hands folded, and said, "It happens more than you think. Let's make sure it doesn't happen to you." That day became the beginning of my silent setup. The beach house, my husband's pride, his sanctuary by the water, was the first thing I safeguarded. The lawyer suggested placing it into a trust, one with clear stipulations that tied ownership not to me alone, but to the name of my late husband. The title would forever reflect his legacy, making it nearly impossible for anyone to tamper with it without going through a wall of legal protections. I signed the papers, and as I did, I felt something inside me settle. That house was no longer vulnerable. It was locked away, anchored to his memory, untouchable. Then came the car. Anna and David always assumed it was mine outright. A shiny toy sitting in my driveway waiting to be sold or handed down. But what they didn't know was that I had deliberately chosen to keep it under a business lease tied to a small consulting service I once ran. On paper, the car didn't belong to me personally. It belonged to the business. And that distinction was everything. You can forge a mother's signature, but it's a lot harder to forge a company's contract. Every step I took was quiet, deliberate, hidden in plain sight. I kept smiling at Anna when she offered to help me with my paperwork. I let her peek into drawers that contained nothing but decoys, old bills, expired insurance forms, meaningless clutter. The real documents were locked away at the lawyer's office, secure and sealed. At night, I would sit at the dining table with a cup of tea, the documents neatly tucked into their folders, and whispered to my husband's photograph on the mantel. "You told me to protect what matters." I listened. His eyes, captured forever in that picture, seemed to remind me that I wasn't just fighting for walls and roofs. I was fighting for dignity, for the years we had built together, for the love that had poured into every corner of our lives. And yet, there was pain in it too, because every precaution I took was a silent acknowledgement that my daughter, the child I carried, the girl I once rocked to sleep, was no longer someone I could blindly trust. Each step of protection felt like stitching armor over my heart, covering the wound she had already begun to inflict. I remember one particular evening when she stopped by unexpectedly. She found me at the table, a folder of documents spread open. She walked in, cheerful and curious, and asked, "What are you working on, Mom?" I smiled, calm as ever, and closed the folder with deliberate ease. "Oh, just sorting through some old papers," I said. She nodded, but I saw it, the flicker in her eyes, the hunger she tried to hide. She wanted to know what I was doing. She wanted to pry. But I didn't let her see a thing. That folder contained nothing but recipes and faded receipts, staged perfectly for her arrival. The real documents were already tucked away, safe where she could never reach them. That night, when she left, I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but resolute. The game had shifted. She thought she was ahead, but the board had been rearranged without her knowing. Every move she made was against a wall I had already built. I cannot deny the ache of it, though. To look at your child and know that she is plotting against you. That's a wound deeper than any legal battle. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, torn between rage and sorrow. I wanted to shake her, to ask her why love wasn't enough, why the warmth of this home and the bond of family could not outweigh greed. But I never asked, because asking would mean admitting out loud what I already knew. She had chosen her path, and so, I let her walk it. Each protection I put in place became my silent weapon. The trust on the beach house, the business lease on the car, the layered legal protections on my main house, ensuring no signature, not even a forged one, could transfer ownership without triggering alarms. She thought she was clever, sneaking around my papers, mimicking my handwriting, whispering schemes with her husband late at night. But she was walking across a floor full of cracks she couldn't see, each one ready to split open beneath her feet. Sometimes I would catch myself smiling, not out of joy, but out of grim resolve. Because betrayal is bitter, yes, but there is a strange, quiet power in knowing that you've already disarmed the one who seeks to wound you. My husband's voice lingered in my mind, steady and strong. Always protect what matters. And I did. Not with confrontation, not with anger, not even with warning, but with silence. With foresight. With the kind of patience that turns a mother's heartbreak into a fortress. They thought they were building their victory. What they didn't realize was that I had already written the ending of this story. They thought they had won. I could hear it in their voices. The smug laughter that carried through the thin walls of my quiet life. Anna and David believed they had pulled off the perfect coup. They strutted around as if the world already belonged to them, as if every late-night scheme and whispered plan had finally borne fruit. I remember that afternoon vividly. The sun was pouring through the windows, a soft golden light that made the house glow. I was sitting in the living room holding a book I couldn't bring myself to read, when I heard their car pull into the driveway. They slammed the doors with such confidence, their footsteps heavy, hurried, triumphant. And then I heard it. Anna's laughter, high-pitched and almost giddy. "We did it," she whispered to David, though her whisper wasn't quiet enough. "Finally, we sold the beach house. Mom has no clue. Tomorrow it's all ours." I sat still, my hands folded over the closed book, and let her words wash over me. She thought she was declaring victory, but to me it sounded like a child boasting after winning a game that was never real to begin with. They came into the kitchen, clattering bags and talking loudly, and that's when David added his part. "The buyer was so eager, Anna. He didn't even ask too many questions. The money's practically in our hands. Can you believe it? Your mom's going to lose everything, and she won't even see it coming. Lose everything." That was the phrase that struck me. They wanted me stripped, reduced, emptied of all I had built, as though I was some obstacle to their dream life. I stayed in the living room, silent, a faint smile tugging at the corner of my lips. Because the truth was, the only thing crumbling was their illusion. The next few days were a spectacle. They started packing, boxes stacked in their car, clothes spilling from suitcases, as if the beach house was already theirs to move into. They told neighbors in proud, hushed tones that they had finally taken over, that it was only a matter of time before they would be living by the ocean. I heard one of the neighbors congratulate them, their voices drifting through the open air. "Wow, you two are lucky. That house is priceless. Your mom must be really generous." Generous. If only they knew. I walked among them, calm and unshaken, brewing coffee in the mornings, folding laundry, tending to my small garden, while Anna paraded around like she was queen of an empire she hadn't built. There were moments when she would look at me, her eyes shining with secret triumph, as if daring me to ask questions. But I never did. That unsettled her more than anything else. My silence became a mirror she couldn't stand to face. Then came the day she introduced me to the so-called buyer. It was a Saturday morning. I was just returning from the market when Anna rushed into the driveway with a tall man in a pressed suit, his handshake firm, his smile wide but nervous. She was practically glowing as she announced, "Mom, this is Mr. Thompson. He's the one who bought the beach house. Isn't it wonderful?" Her voice trembled with pride, like she had finally proven something, like she had finally outsmarted me. I extended my hand to Mr. Thompson, studied the sweat gathering at his temples. The way his eyes darted from me to Anna and back again. Something about his unease told me he wasn't as certain as she was. I offered him the same smile I had perfected. A smile that revealed nothing. "A pleasure to meet you," I said softly. But inside, I could feel the ground shifting. Because Mr. Thompson wasn't smiling back with confidence, he was frowning, glancing at a stack of papers he clutched under his arm. Papers that, no doubt, didn't line up with what he'd been promised. Anna, oblivious, kept talking. "We'll be moving in soon, Mom. David and I are finally going to live the life we deserve. Don't worry, you'll get used to it. The life we deserve." Her words cut, but not the way she intended. They revealed her heart, stripped bare for me to see. She didn't want security. She didn't want family. She wanted possession, ownership, control. I stood there, watching her beam with false triumph, and I realized something almost tragic. She believed she had already won, but her victory was hollow, built on lies that were unraveling even as she spoke. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, shifting from foot to foot. "Anna, about the deed. There's something I need to clarify," he said. His voice cracked slightly. I turned my gaze to her, slow and deliberate, and watched the confidence drain from her face as he began fumbling with the paperwork. She didn't understand yet, not fully. But I did. The cracks in their illusion were widening. The deal was beginning to crumble. And all I had to do was stand there, silent, and let it collapse on its own. The day of reckoning came sooner than Anna expected. She had arranged for me to meet the buyers at the beach house, parading it as if it were a formality, just one last step before her supposed triumph became permanent. I agreed without hesitation, which surprised her. Perhaps she expected me to resist, to question her. But I didn't. I simply smiled, slipped on my shawl and followed her lead, letting her believe she was the master of this moment. The drive to the coast was quiet. The ocean air was crisp, and as we pulled into the familiar driveway, my heart tightened. That house wasn't just walls and windows, it was memories. My husband and I had built our dreams within those walls. We had hosted birthdays, holidays, quiet dinners, and long nights of laughter. Every corner held his voice. Every window framed a moment of our life together. And now my daughter was attempting to hand it away like some trinket at a yard sale. When we arrived, the buyers were already waiting, Mr. Thompson and his wife. They stood near their car, clutching papers, shifting uneasily from foot to foot. I could tell by their expressions that something was wrong, even before a word was spoken. Anna jumped out first, her voice cheery and full of false pride. "Mom, come on, don't take all day. We need to get this over with. Mr. Thompson and his wife are excited to finalize everything." I stepped out slowly, breathing in the salt air, letting the silence linger. The couple turned to me, and the wife spoke first, her tone hesitant. "Ma'am, we just want to clarify some things. The documents we received, they don't match the county records. We were told this property was signed over by your daughter, but according to the office, the deed doesn't list her name anywhere." Her words hung in the air like a heavy fog. I looked directly at Mr. Thompson, then at his wife, then finally at Anna. My daughter's confident smile wavered just slightly. I took a step forward, my voice calm, steady, unshaken. "You didn't buy anything," I said firmly, "because this house was never hers to sell." Silence. Pure, crushing silence. Anna's eyes widened, her mouth falling open before quickly snapping shut. She stammered, "What are you talking about? I had the papers, I signed everything." I shook my head slowly, keeping my eyes locked on hers. "The papers you had were nothing. The deed has never left my name. More than that, Anna. This house is bound by a trust. Your father's name is still tied to it. It was his legacy, his gift to us, and no amount of forged signatures or whispered deals can ever erase that." Mr. Thompson ran a hand over his face, his frustration plain. "So you're saying we handed over money for nothing?" His voice cracked with anger. His wife gasped softly, clutching his arm. I nodded, though my heart ached for them. They were victims too, caught in the web my daughter had spun. I'm afraid so, I answered gently. You were misled. I'm sorry this happened to you. But you'll need to take it up with the ones who deceived you. All eyes turned to Anna. Her face flushed red, then pale, then red again. She stumbled over her words, pointing a trembling finger at me. No, you don't understand. She's lying. She's trying to make me look like a fool. She's the one who betrayed me. She promised me everything would be mine. Her words sliced through me, sharper than any blade. Betrayal turned backward. Accusations hurled at the very person she had wounded. I inhaled slowly, forcing my voice to remain steady. Betray you? Anna, I am your mother. I carried you, raised you, gave you love when I had nothing left to give. I trusted you even when you gave me reason not to. And this is what you've done with that trust. You tried to take from me behind my back without a word of honesty. And now you call me the betrayer. Her eyes brimmed with tears, her chest heaving. She shouted, her voice cracking. You never gave me enough. You kept everything for yourself. You made me feel like a child in my own family. Never important, never in control. All I wanted was my share, what I deserved. Her words pierced, not because they were true, but because they revealed the raw wound festering inside her all these years. I stepped closer, my voice trembling now, heavy with grief. Your share? Anna, everything I have was meant to be shared. With you, with your children, with a family your father dreamed we'd build together. But you couldn't wait. You couldn't trust. You decided to take, not receive. To steal, not inherit. That is not love. That is not family. That is betrayal. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but instead of softening, her face hardened with rage. You'll regret this, she spat, her voice low and shaking. You'll regret making me your enemy. I felt my own tears sting, but I refused to let them fall in front of her. Instead, I turned back to Mr. Thompson and his wife, who looked horrified, bewildered, trapped in the middle of a storm they hadn't seen coming. I'm sorry, I said again softly. You deserve better than this. I'll provide the evidence you need to reclaim what you've lost. But this house, it was never for sale. And it never will be. Anna collapsed onto the front steps, sobbing, her husband standing stiffly beside her, his jaw clenched but his eyes filled with something that looked almost like fear. I wanted to reach out, to hold her, to remind her that she was still my daughter. But the chasm between us had grown too wide. And in that moment I realized the truth. I hadn't betrayed her. She had betrayed herself, and there was nothing I could do to change that. The ocean roared in the background, relentless, indifferent, as if it had seen families break apart 1,000 times before. I stood there in the salt air, my heart heavy but resolute, knowing that the truth had finally been spoken, and Anna, for the first time, could no longer run from it. The fallout came faster than Anna could brace for, and it came like a storm she never saw coming. Mr. Thompson and his wife wasted no time. They left the house that day shaken, furious, and determined to recover what they had been cheated out of. Within a week, papers were filed, lawyers were contacted, and Anna and David's names began circulating in conversations no one ever wants attached to their reputation. Fraud, deception, forgery. These words followed them like shadows, staining every interaction. At first, they tried to play it off. I overheard David telling a neighbor, his voice dripping with false confidence, that it was all a misunderstanding, that it would blow over once the dust settled. But the neighbor's response was short, cold, clipped. We'll see, was all he said before walking away. And I noticed it, the shift. The same people who once smiled warmly at Anna in the grocery store or waved from across the street now crossed to the other side, their greetings stiff, their eyes full of judgment. It wasn't long before invitations stopped coming. Their phones rang less. Friends who had once eagerly shared dinners with them now claimed they were busy, or simply stopped responding altogether. Anna's circle, which she once flaunted proudly, shrank into nothing more than whispers behind her back. And me? I sat in the middle of it all, my emotions tangled, impossible to untangle neatly. There were nights I felt rage so sharp it made my hands tremble, remembering how she had looked me in the eye and tried to take everything I held dear. But there were also mornings when I woke with a heaviness in my chest, weighed down by the grief of knowing my own child had chosen greed over love. I would sit at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee, and think back to the sacrifices that had shaped our lives. I remembered working 2 jobs after her father died, my body aching, my eyes heavy with exhaustion, just to keep food on the table. I remembered sewing her dresses by hand when I couldn't afford new clothes, sitting up late into the night with a needle and thread so she wouldn't feel less than the other girls at school. I remembered the Christmas when all I could afford was a second-hand doll, and how I wrapped it carefully, praying she wouldn't notice it wasn't new. But when she tore open the paper, her eyes had lit up with joy, and she hugged me, whispering, "Thank you, Mommy." That moment carried me for years, a reminder that love was stronger than circumstance. And now that same child had tried to rip away the very roof over my head. The betrayal cut deep, not just because of what she tried to take, but because of how much I had given, how much I had bled quietly just to make sure she had more than I ever did. To realize that she saw all of that as nothing, it hollowed me out in places I didn't know existed. One evening, I found myself standing by the ocean near the beach house, the waves crashing against the shore. I thought of my husband, of the promises we had made to raise Anna with love and values, to give her the tools to live with integrity. I wondered if I had failed him, if somewhere along the way, I had missed the signs that she was slipping into a hunger that love could never satisfy. The tears came then, harder than before. The kind that left me gasping for breath, clutching at my chest as though grief itself was tearing me apart. I whispered into the wind, "Why, Anna? Why wasn't my love enough?" But the ocean gave no answer, only the endless roar of waves meeting the shore, relentless and uncaring. In those days, I felt like a hollow vessel, moving through life on autopilot. I cooked meals I barely touched, folded laundry I never put away, stared at the phone when it rang, dreading that it would be more bad news about Anna and David. Every memory of her childhood became a knife twisting deeper, her first steps, her first day of school. The night she crawled into bed beside me when storms scared her. How could that little girl grow into the woman who now sat across courtrooms accused of fraud? But even in the darkness, a spark remained. Because with every pang of sorrow came a small, undeniable truth. I had survived worse. I had buried the love of my life, carried the weight of single motherhood, and built a life from scraps. This betrayal, this heartbreak, it would scar me. Yes, but it would not end me. There was strength in knowing that despite her attempts, I still had my home. I still had the memories my husband and I had created. I still had my dignity. And that silent strength, that unshaken foundation, became my shield. Anna's world was collapsing. Legal notices piled up on her doorstep. Debt collectors began calling, relentless and unforgiving. David grew distant, his voice sharp when he spoke to her, the cracks in their marriage widening with every passing day. And as much as it pained me, I could not shield her from the consequences she had chosen. The neighbors whispered, the community turned away, and in their isolation, Anna and David began to realize the truth. They had not only lost the battle they thought they won, they had lost themselves in the process. And me? I was left to carry both the burden of my heartbreak and the quiet empowerment of knowing I had stood strong. I had not lashed out in rage. I had not screamed or cursed. I had simply let the truth unravel itself, and in doing so, I had kept my promise to my husband, to protect what mattered. Yet in the silence of the night, when the house was still and the shadows long, I felt the ache of a mother who had lost her child in all but name. That ache is what lingers most, the kind that no court victory or community sympathy can ever heal. My revenge did not come with raised voices or bitter curses. It came quietly, in silence, in the kind of calm that makes people uneasy because they expect chaos and receive nothing but stillness. That silence was my weapon, and it cut deeper than anything I could have screamed at Anna. I made no dramatic announcements. I did not call her to tell her she was cut off. I simply stopped being the safety net she had always counted on. When the bills came, I did not offer to cover them. When the rent collectors knocked on their door, I did not rush to rescue her. When David stormed out after another fight, leaving her to clean up the mess, I stayed still. For years I had been her anchor. When she struggled with money in college, I had worked overtime to send her what little I could. When her first marriage fell apart, I had opened my home, my kitchen, and my arms to her, nursing her wounds while ignoring my own. But now she had to face a world without my hand holding hers. It did not happen all at once. At first she was confident, even arrogant, as though my withdrawal meant nothing. She still carried herself with that pride, telling people she had everything under control. But I knew my daughter better than anyone. I knew that confidence was nothing more than a mask, a fragile shield against the unraveling that was already beginning. The first time she called, her voice was sharp, demanding. She wanted me to fix things, to pay for a lawyer, to talk to the Thompsons, to make the nightmare disappear. I listened in silence, and when she was finished, I said only 5 words. "This time you're on your own." Then I hung up. That silence on the other end of the line, when she realized I meant it, was the first crack. The second time she came in person. She showed up at my door, her face pale, her eyes swollen from tears. She spoke softer then, almost pleading, reminding me of everything I had done for her in the past. She wanted me to believe she had changed, that she understood now. But I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. So I opened the door only wide enough to tell her, "You sold more than a house that day. You sold me too. And I'm not for sale." Then I closed it gently and locked it. Days turned to weeks, and the silence grew heavier. Word spread quickly. David had left, unable to bear the strain. The legal trouble mounted, their friends were gone, and the money they thought they would gain had vanished into nothing. She was left standing in the ruins of the life she tried to build on lies. And me? I was free. For the first time in years, I felt a peace that had been buried under years of sacrifice and unending obligation. I went to the dealership and bought myself a new car, not extravagant, not flashy, but mine. It purred softly when I drove it, carrying me forward like a quiet promise of new beginnings. I remember the first drive I took in it. I headed straight to the beach house, the one she had tried to steal. I parked, walked inside, and breathed in the air of freedom. The rooms were still mine, untouched by her betrayal. The walls still held the laughter of my husband and me, the quiet mornings with coffee, the sunsets we used to watch together. Nothing she did could erase that. I spent that entire day at the beach house alone. I brewed tea, sat on the porch, and watched the waves roll in and out. The ocean had always been honest with me. It never pretended, never lied. Its rhythm was steady, unbroken, reminding me that life, no matter how turbulent, always finds a way back to calm. There was no noise, no arguments, no tears. Only me, the waves, and the sound of my own breathing. And in that silence I found my revenge, not in destroying her, but in reclaiming myself. I knew she was struggling, desperate, scrambling to find footing where there was none. But I did not gloat. I did not celebrate her downfall. My revenge was in living, in choosing peace over chaos, in refusing to let her betrayal poison the rest of my days. The beauty of silent revenge is that it does not need applause. It does not need to be spoken. It exists in the dignity of walking away, in the strength of saying nothing while the world expects you to shout. My silence became her loudest punishment, and my peace became her deepest loss. That day at the beach house, I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "I am free." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. 3 weeks passed before my phone rang again. This time it wasn't the sharp, commanding tone of a woman who thought she had the upper hand. It was a sound that pierced me deeper than any insult ever could. The sound of my daughter's sobs. "Mom," she cried, her voice trembling, broken. "Please. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to go this far. We lost everything. The landlord kicked us out, David left, I don't have anywhere to go. Please, Mom, please forgive me. I need you." The weight of those words pressed heavily against my chest. For a moment I couldn't breathe. She wasn't just asking for money or shelter. She was asking me to erase everything that had been done, to forget the sting of betrayal that still burned like salt in an open wound. And in that moment I felt two women fighting inside me. One was the mother who had carried her, raised her, wiped her tears, held her when the world seemed cruel. That woman wanted to reach through the phone, pull her into my arms, and tell her everything would be all right. But the other woman, the one who had been betrayed, deceived, and nearly robbed of everything, knew that forgiveness, if given too freely, would make a mockery of every scar she left on my heart. I sat there, the phone warm against my ear, listening to her cry. Her sobs came in waves, each one crashing harder than the last. She told me she regretted everything, that she would give anything to take it back. She swore she had learned her lesson, that she knew now what mattered most. But I also knew her too well. I could hear the desperation in her tone, and I couldn't shake the thought that it wasn't love or remorse that drove her words. It was need. Need for shelter. Need for food. Need for rescue. Not need for me. As she cried, I closed my eyes and let myself remember. I remembered the first day I brought her home from the hospital, swaddled in a pink blanket, her tiny fingers curling around mine as if promising she would always hold on. I remembered the school plays where I sat in the front row, clapping until my hands were red, just to make her smile. I remembered the nights when she was sick, when I stayed awake by her bed, whispering prayers into the darkness that she would be well by morning. And then I remembered the coldness in her voice the day she told me my house and my car were gone. I remembered the pride in her tone, the cruel finality in her words. I remembered the laughter she shared with David as they bragged about their so-called victory. That was not the voice of a daughter who loved her mother. That was the voice of someone who had chosen greed over family, lies over loyalty. Her tears now didn't wash away those choices. They didn't erase the damage. So I listened. I let her pour her heart out, every word dripping with desperation. And when she was done, when her voice cracked and broke into silence, I whispered only one thing. Nothing. I said nothing at all. I set the phone down slowly, my hand trembling. and let the silence answer for me. The hardest part of revenge is not the anger. It's the silence. Silence demands strength. It requires you to resist every instinct that tells you to fix, to comfort, to heal. But that silence is also where peace lives. By not responding, by refusing to let her back into the place she had burned, I kept my peace intact. The calls kept coming in the days that followed. Sometimes she screamed, accusing me of cruelty. Other times she begged, her voice small, childlike, as if she were 5 years old again. But no matter what tone she chose, my answer was always the same. Silence. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my heart aching. Because no matter what she had done, she was still my daughter. Flesh of my flesh. Blood of my blood. And it cut deeply to know that she was out there, lost and broken. But then I would remind myself, she had chosen this path. She had drawn the knife that cut between us. I had simply chosen not to bleed for her anymore. One evening, as I sat on the porch of my beach house, the sun setting in hues of gold and crimson, I whispered to the wind, forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is freedom. But some betrayals cannot be welcomed back into the home they destroyed. And with that, I let the silence carry my answer. My revenge was not in her suffering. My revenge was in my peace, in my dignity, in my refusal to let her mistake define the rest of my life. She wanted me to save her, but I chose to save myself. And that choice, though painful, was the most powerful one I ever made. I had carried the weight of my daughter's betrayal like an anchor tied to my heart. Each day, the silence between us grew heavier, but with that silence also came clarity. For weeks, I replayed everything in my mind, wondering if there was a way to undo the pain, to stitch the wound she had carved into me. But some wounds don't close. They harden, they scar, and they become reminders of what we can no longer ignore. And yet, I was not entirely without hope. You see, there was one more truth I hadn't revealed to anyone, not even to her. A truth I had quietly secured months before she ever dreamed of stealing from me. Long before the phone call that shattered everything, I had sat in a lawyer's office, pen in hand, staring at the final draft of my will. The memories of my late husband filled that room, his voice echoing in my mind, reminding me of the promise we made to each other, that we would protect what mattered most, even beyond our own lives. That day, I kept that promise. I signed my name beneath words that would shape the future of everything I had built. The beach house, the car, the savings, all of it. Not a cent, not a stone, not even a chair in my home was promised to my daughter. Instead, I left it all to the one person who still looked at me with innocent eyes untouched by greed, the granddaughter who bore her mother's name but not her mother's mistakes. Yes, I had already made certain that when I was gone, everything would pass directly to her. My granddaughter. My daughter's child. The bloodline would continue, but the inheritance would skip a generation. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't spite. It was protection. It was love, but directed where it could still grow without being twisted by selfish hands. I wanted to make sure that the lessons her mother had ignored would not be lost on her. That she would know her grandmother valued honesty, loyalty, and kindness over deceit and manipulation. I may have lost my daughter's love, but I had not lost the power to shape what came next. Betrayal had stolen a mother-daughter bond, but it had not stolen my wisdom. And wisdom builds legacies. I remember standing at the edge of the beach one evening, the tide low, the sun sinking behind the horizon, and my granddaughter's laughter ringing out as she ran across the sand. She didn't know of lawyers or wills or signatures on paper. She only knew that her grandmother loved her, and in her small arms wrapping around my waist, I felt something pure, something untouched by the shadows her mother had cast. That night, I whispered a promise to the waves. You will inherit more than a house or a car. You will inherit strength, truth, and a legacy unbroken by betrayal. And that is the final twist in this story. My daughter thought she could strip me of everything, but in the end, she stripped only herself. What she lost was far greater than property or money. She lost trust. She lost love. She lost her place in a legacy that will now live on without her. So let this be the lesson. Betrayal may destroy bonds, but it cannot destroy resilience. And while deceit may tear families apart, wisdom can rebuild what matters, sometimes not with the same hands, but with the next generations. I may have lost my daughter's love, but I made sure the next generation will never repeat her mistakes. That is my silent revenge. That is my peace. And if you've stayed with me through this journey, I'll leave you with this. Don't ever underestimate the strength of a woman who has been broken but not defeated. Because in her silence lies her greatest power, and in her wisdom lies the legacy she leaves behind. In life, there are betrayals that leave us gasping, wounds so deep they never quite heal. And yet, the greatest form of revenge is not shouting, not punishing, not lowering yourself to the level of those who hurt you. True revenge is far quieter, far stronger. It is protecting your peace. It is guarding your dignity. It is standing tall while those who sought to destroy you drown in the chaos they created for themselves. I did not scream. I did not fight in courtrooms or beg for apologies that would never have been sincere. I chose silence. I chose stillness. And in that silence, I found strength. My daughter thought she had taken everything from me, but what she failed to see was that nothing of real value can ever be stolen. Not my integrity, not my peace, not my wisdom. In the end, she lost far more than I ever did. I lost a daughter who had chosen greed, but she lost a mother who would have given her the world. And I gained something she could never touch, freedom. If you've stayed with me till the very end of this story, don't leave without giving it a like, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. And please, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It truly warms my heart to see how far these stories travel. Your support means more than you realize, and it's what keeps these stories alive. And as for me, I'll keep telling these stories, because betrayal, heartbreak, and silent revenge are not mine alone. They belong to so many of us. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing them, we remind one another that we are never truly alone. So let me leave you with this thought. If you think this story was unforgettable, wait until you hear the next one.